shall not the judge of all the earth do right? Genesis 18:25. The line cuts through the ancient silence like a blade as Abraham stands alone on the ridge above the Jordan Valley, staring toward the distant glow of Sodom, a city pulsing with wealth, arrogance, and something far darker, while the air thickens with heat rising from the plain. The kind that distorts the horizon and makes the world shimmer like a mirage, even though nothing about this moment is an illusion, because the land below him is real. The danger is real, and the judgment approaching it is real. The scriptures describe Sodom as a place swollen with excess, a society so volatile it could ignite from a single spark, a true powder keg waiting for ignition. Yet Abraham, man with everything to lose, steps into the path of divine fire and risks his standing, his future, and even the covenant that defines him. He does this because something compels him to stand between heaven and a city that mocks righteousness. And the question rises, why would he do it? Then there is the catastrophe itself, the fire from heaven that would erase Sodom from the map. And the question becomes whether it was myth or whether the earth recorded the blast in its own language through melted pottery, fractured minerals, and a destruction layer so violent it still defies explanation. This documentary builds a case on three pillars: the world that made Sodom combustible, the motive that drove Abraham to intervene, and the forensic scars that may still burn beneath the soil. Subscribe to follow this investigation into the oldest catastrophe ever recorded. The wind moves across the highlands of Mamre with a low, restless hum that carries the scent of dust and distant salt as Abraham lifts his eyes and sees three figures, approaching travelers who walk like men but radiate a presence that unsettles the air around them. He runs to meet them, bowing low and offering water, bread, and shade beneath the ancient terebinths. And although the meal unfolds quietly, the silence feels charged as if the world is holding its breath. A promise is spoken while Sarah listens from the tent, her laughter thin and brittle. But then the atmosphere shifts as the visitors rise and turn their gaze toward the kicker, the lush circle of land that cradles Sodom and Gomorrah. Abraham walks with them, each step echoing with a tension he cannot name until the Lord reveals the truth that the outcry against Sodom is great. Its corruption deep, and judgment is coming. Abraham stops as the valley below glitters with prosperity through irrigated fields, fortified gates, and caravans moving along the trade routes. Yet beneath the beauty lies a sickness of violence and exploitation, a society devouring itself from the inside out. He steps forward with a voice trembling but unbroken and asks, "Will you indeed sweep away the righteous with the wicked?" The tension tightens and the stakes sharpen. And to understand Abraham's plea, we must understand the world he was pleading for, a world perched on the edge of disaster. And so we descend into the real Sodom, a city built on wealth, corruption, and geological instability. To understand the gravity of Abraham's intercession, we must first understand the land itself. A region where beauty and danger lived side by side, where prosperity masked instability, and where the ground beneath one's feet could betray an entire civilization. The southern Jordan Valley, dominated by the fertile kicker, was no mythic backdrop, but a real, thriving, volatile world. Archaeologists describe the kicker as a broad circular plain north of the Dead Sea, a landscape shaped by the Jordan River and framed by steep highlands. And its fertility was legendary because seasonal flooding enriched the soil and turned the region into an agricultural powerhouse that produced grapes, dates, and grain in abundance. Where there is abundance, there is power, and where there is power, corruption follows. Excavations at Tall el Hammam, led by Dr. Stephen Collins, beginning in 2005, uncovered a massive Middle Bronze Age city dominating this plain, and its footprint of nearly 100 acres made it the largest urban center in the southern Levant during the era traditionally associated with Abraham. Towering fortification walls, administrative buildings, industrial zones, and irrigation systems revealed a city of immense wealth and influence. And the biblical description of Sodom as a principal city of the plain fits this archaeological profile with unsettling precision. Yet prosperity alone does not make a powder keg, because the moral climate of the ancient Near East adds another layer of volatility. Texts from the same era, such as the Mari letters, describe city-states marked by exploitation, sexual violence, and systemic injustice. And although Sodom is not named in these documents, the cultural parallels are unmistakable. The world of the Middle Bronze Age was a world where the powerful consumed the weak, where hospitality was sacred because danger lurked behind every door, and where cities could rot from the inside long before their walls fell. Yet the most explosive element of Sodom's world lay beneath the soil, because the Dead Sea Transform Fault runs directly through this region. It's one of the most active seismic zones in the Middle East. Geological studies by Dr. Amos Neer of Stanford University document repeated Bronze Age earthquakes capable of triggering landslides, gas releases, and surface ruptures, and the ground here is layered with bitumen, sulfur, and natural gas pockets, materials that ignite with terrifying ease. Ancient writers like Strabo describe the area as a place of burning pits and boiling asphalt, a landscape where fire could erupt from the earth without warning. A wealthy, corrupt city built on a geological fault line saturated with flammable materials is the definition of a powder keg. And the archaeological footprint confirms the scale of what stood here. Tall el Hammam's Middle Bronze Age layers reveal a city with the infrastructure of a kingdom, including massive walls, a palace complex, storage facilities, and industrial workshops. And a city like this does not vanish quietly, because its destruction would leave a scar. The world of Sodom was real, powerful, corrupt, and perched on the edge of a geological abyss. Like this investigation, if you want more evidence-driven biblical documentaries brought to life. Night settles over the highlands like a heavy cloak as Abraham stands alone while the three visitors descend toward the kicker, their silhouettes swallowed by the darkness. The stars emerge one by one, sharp and cold, scattered across the sky like ancient witnesses, and the valley below flickers with distant torchlight from Sodom's walls, a reminder that life continues there through feasting, trading, and scheming, unaware that judgment is already walking toward its gates. Abraham's chest tightens because he knows what kind of city Sodom has become. Having heard the stories carried by travelers and shepherds, and having seen the cruelty in the eyes of men who came from its streets. Yet he also knows there are innocents there, people who never chose the violence around them, people who simply tried to survive in a world that rewarded the ruthless and crushed the weak. He steps forward again, as if the conversation with God still lingers in the air, and the numbers fall like lifelines. 50, righteous, 45, 40, 30, 20, 10. Each number is a plea for lives drowning in corruption, and each request is a reminder that Abraham is not bargaining for statistics, but fighting for human beings. The tension coils tighter, and the night grows heavier, and somewhere in the darkness, the first tremor of coming destruction stirs beneath the earth. To understand why Abraham risked everything, we must understand the world he came from and the ancient customs that shaped his courage. The investigation turns now to the historical Abraham, the intercessor who stepped into the path of divine fire. To grasp the weight of Abraham's intercession, we must step into the world of the early 2nd millennium BCE, a world defined by honor, covenant, and the fragile balance between tribal loyalty and divine allegiance. Abraham's plea for Sodom was not an impulsive act of sentiment, but a historically grounded action, shaped by the legal, cultural, and spiritual frameworks of his time. The first clue lies in Abraham's identity, because he is not a wandering mystic drifting through the desert, but a patriarch, a chieftain, a man whose household included hundreds of trained men, as recorded in Genesis 14. Archaeological parallels from the Middle Bronze Age, particularly the Mari tablets discovered by André Perret in Ijo-Sensen, reveal that tribal leaders like Abraham held real political influence, negotiated with kings, formed alliances, and acted as mediators in regional disputes. Abraham's intercession fits this profile precisely as a leader stepping into a crisis that threatened the stability of the entire region. But there is a deeper layer, because Abraham had history with Sodom. In Genesis 14, he rescued the city's captives after the invasion of the eastern kings, and this act established a bond not of affection, but of responsibility. In the ancient Near East, such actions created what scholars call a covenantal expectation. And even if Sodom rejected Abraham's values, the rescue forged a relational thread that could not be easily severed. The cultural backdrop reinforces this because hospitality was not merely a virtue, but a sacred duty. The Code of Hammurabi and the Lipit Ishtar laws emphasize the protection of strangers and the vulnerable. And Abraham, whose entire identity is built around hospitality, as seen in his welcome of the 3 visitors, embodies this ethic. Sodom, by contrast, violated it catastrophically. And the contrast between Abraham's tent and Sodom's gates is not literary symbolism, but a reflection of real cultural expectations of the era. Another thread emerges from Abraham's relationship with God because the covenant, established in Genesis 15 and reaffirmed in Genesis 17, positions Abraham as a partner in God's redemptive mission, and this partnership carries responsibility. When God reveals his intention to judge Sodom, Abraham understands that silence would be complicity, and intercession becomes an act of covenantal loyalty, a willingness to stand in the tension between divine justice and divine mercy. Ancient parallels strengthen this interpretation because the Akkadian prayer of lamentation and the Sumerian city laments show leaders pleading with deities to spare their cities, invoking righteousness, justice, and compassion. Abraham's dialogue with God mirrors these ancient intercessory traditions, but with one radical difference. Abraham appeals not to capricious gods, but to a moral judge, grounding his plea in the character of divine justice itself. There is also the matter of Lot, because Abraham's nephew lived in Sodom, and family loyalty in the ancient world was absolute. The Nuzi tablets excavated by Edward Kira in the 1920s reveal adoption and inheritance customs that highlight the weight of kinship bonds. And Abraham's intercession is not abstract, but personal because he is fighting for his family. Finally, the structure of Abraham's negotiation. With descending numbers, and each request more daring than the last, reflects a known pattern in ancient diplomacy. The Amarna letters, though later, preserve similar bargaining sequences between vassals and overlords, and Abraham's plea is not random, but a recognizable diplomatic form. Taken together, these threads form a coherent picture because Abraham's intercession is historically plausible, culturally grounded, and textually consistent with the world of the Middle Bronze Age. His courage is not an anomaly, but the natural expression of a patriarch shaped by covenant, kinship, honor, and a profound sense of justice. Comment below if you want more deep-dive investigations into the historical world behind the scriptures. Dawn breaks over the highlands with a strange, unnatural stillness as Abraham rises early, the cold air biting at his skin while he walks toward the ridge overlooking the Kicker. The valley below is shrouded in a pale haze that clings to the earth after a restless night. And he narrows his eyes, searching for the familiar outlines of Sodom and Gomorrah, the walls, the towers, and the smoke from morning fires. But the horizon is wrong because a dark column rises from the plain, twisting upward like a living thing while the ground trembles beneath his feet. A low, distant roar rolls across the valley, the kind of sound that comes not from the sky, but from the earth itself. And Abraham's breath catches as he realizes the cities are gone, not fallen, not conquered, but erased. The scriptures describe it as fire from heaven, a judgment so violent that it overturned the soil and consumed everything within its reach. And Abraham stands in silence as the wind whips his cloak and the rising smoke stains the sky a deep, bruised red. Somewhere in that devastation lies his nephew Lot, alive he hopes, though hope feels fragile in this moment. The world has changed, and the valley has changed, and the evidence of what happened here will be buried beneath ash and ruin for thousands of years. To understand the scale of this destruction, we turn to the earth itself and the forensic scars that still burn beneath the soil. If the destruction of Sodom truly happened, the earth would remember it because catastrophes of this magnitude leave fingerprints in the soil, in the minerals, and in the shattered remains of a city that died in an instant. In the northern kicker at the site known as Tall el Hammam, the ground tells a story that is as haunting as it is explosive. Excavations led by Dr. Stephen Collins beginning in 2005 uncovered a destruction layer unlike anything else in the region because the city, once the largest in the southern Levant, was obliterated in a single moment. Walls were sheared off at their foundations, mud brick structures were pulverized into fine powder, and pottery was not merely broken but melted and fused into glass by temperatures exceeding 2,000 degrees Celsius. Such heat is not produced by warfare or fire or any known ancient weapon because it is the signature of something far more violent. Among the most striking discoveries were fragments of shocked quartz, minerals whose internal structure has been deformed by pressures normally associated with cosmic impacts or nuclear-level explosions. And these minerals do not form in ordinary fires, but require an event of unimaginable force. The soil itself contains microscopic spherules of molten metal and silica, the kind produced when buildings, tools, and city infrastructure are vaporized and then cooled in mid-air. And this is not the residue of a slow burn, but the residue of a blast. The destruction layer also contains high concentrations of salt, a detail that resonates with the biblical description of the region becoming a wasteland, and a sudden influx of superheated brine from the Dead Sea, propelled by a massive shockwave, could explain the salinization that made the area uninhabitable for centuries. It is important to acknowledge the debate because a 2021 paper in Nature Scientific reports propose that Tall el Hammam was destroyed by a cosmic airburst similar to the 1908 Tunguska event in Siberia. And although the paper was later retracted due to issues with citations and editorial process, the physical evidence was not disproven. The melted pottery, the shocked quartz, and the high-temperature debris remain real, excavated, cataloged, and published in multiple independent studies. The mainstream archaeological community remains divided on whether Tall el Hammam is Sodom, with some arguing for alternative sites like Bab Eth, Dra, and others cautioning against linking any site directly to the biblical narrative. Yet, even among skeptics, the destruction layer at Tall el Hammam is recognized as one of the most violent events in the region's Bronze Age history. The alignment with the biblical account is striking because we see a wealthy city in a fertile plain that experienced a sudden, catastrophic destruction, a blast so intense it left the land uninhabitable, and a memory preserved in Scripture as fire from heaven. The earth does not lie because it records trauma with perfect honesty, and in the northern kicker, the soil still whispers of a night when the sky burned and a civilization vanished in an instant. Share this documentary to bring more people into the investigation of the world's oldest catastrophe. 3 pillars and 1 story reveal a world that was real, a man who stood in the gap, and a catastrophe that still scars the earth. The first pillar showed us a city perched on the edge of disaster, wealthy, corrupt, and built on a geological fault line saturated with flammable materials. And Sodom was not a mythic symbol of moral decay, but a real city in a real landscape, a powder keg waiting for a spark. The second pillar revealed the heart of Abraham, a patriarch shaped by covenant, honor, kinship, and justice, and his intercession was not an anomaly but the natural expression of a leader who understood the weight of responsibility because he risked everything as righteousness demands courage even when the world around you is collapsing. The third pillar confronted us with the forensic truth because the destruction layer at Tall el Hammam, with its melted pottery, shocked quartz, and high-temperature debris, stands as a haunting echo of the biblical fire from heaven. Debated, yes, but undeniable in its violence, and the earth remembers what happened here. Together, these pillars form a case that is not merely historical, but spiritual and moral. A reminder that justice and mercy walk side by side and that intercession still matters in a world trembling on its own fault lines. May this investigation draw you deeper into the truth of Scripture and stir a prayer within you for the cities of our own generation.